Welcome back to Views from the Field. Tonight, we're very honored to have a very special guest, the senior teacher in our community, Valerie York-Zimmerman, join us. Valerie, welcome.
Thank you, Allan. It's great to be here. Even if this week is a little different than other weeks, I'm happy to be with you.
Oh, thank you. They're all different. I'm tempted to let go of the rote introduction of bio points because you encompass so much in your experience in the field that I'd like to just toss it to you and see how you would like to introduce yourself.
Well, that's interesting. I guess I would like to say that I have been, well, first of all, let me say that I believe suffering is universal. And as a result, I've been seeking. I've been on a path my entire life. And it was a circuitous path. And it arrived at mindfulness, actually, because I happened to channel surf and come across Healing in the Mind, the Bill Moyers special that featured Jon Kabat-Zinn and that wonderful documentary series, which introduced me to what Jon was doing. And so that kind of opened a door to an entirely different world, for which I am extremely grateful. But maybe I'll say a few things about where I came from. Something that maybe most of us don't think very much about, and I didn't either, actually, in some ways. But I was placed in the New York Foundling Home as a child, and I was adopted. And so many people have a wonderful, I think, impression of that. And I think for very many people, it can be a wonderful thing to happen. And many people do very well and they thrive. I was not one of them. And I'm not the only one, certainly, because much later on in life, when these issues came up for me, which they came up late, my connection to the adoption issue, but I have, struggled with this for most of my entire life. And I think it is based upon certain things. And I have met along the path many people who are in this same place, who have suffered a lot and continue to seek. They feel lost. So my experience was being adopted by people who were very well-meaning. I think all people are. But as with most things, whether or not you have understanding or skill or the ability to be present, to be kind, it really plays a large role. And something that I didn't know about until many years later when I literally ran into a brick wall. I found my husband is a medical doctor, and I started having some real difficulties because usually there are people who can go through life pretty well thinking everything is fine, and then some sort of event happens, whether it's a marriage or a death or some major life experience, which happened to me. And I started to go on this quest and found out from key people here in the South Florida community that there really wasn't anybody to help me because this was not taught in medical school or in clinical psychology. But there were things going on in Washington and New York, and so that led me there. But what I've learned in this process is that the maternal infant bond is very, very strong, and it occurs in utero. And while this may not seem like a big deal, when a child is separated from the birth mother, who that child has known in terms of environmentally, the heartbeat, the emotional landscape, everything, when that is all of a sudden taken away, the child is either is maybe strong enough to do okay or maybe not. And then begins to get rattled. And I believe that I really did have some trauma with that. And I felt lost. And so I was in this foundling home for a while, and I was adopted by this family who meant well. But my adoptive mother was, had difficulties. She was troubled. And so things did not go very well for me. I was fortunate enough to be raised by a very strong grandmother, so she taught me things like how to work hard and how to be disciplined. And, you know, life went along pretty well. But there is this issue of the maternal bond that I think people don't understand. And I thought I would bring this up today because I think it's important. Because the more we know, the better we can do. The more understanding we have, you know, the better we can see. So there was a book that I found out in this quest of going to Washington and to New York called The Primal Wound. And it's written by a woman named Nancy Verrier. And she also wrote another book, a more clinical book about all of this. But it talks a lot about trauma in early childhood and what that can result in. And so I came from this kind of shaky place, but I did find my way and went on. But it wasn't easy. And I found that I was going into a place where I either did everything I could to feel better or not to feel anything. And this went on for a long time, and I tried everything. I tried all kinds of therapy. I became very involved in a church, which was wonderful. And I could see the people around me. They had joy, they had hope, they had love, you know, they had this thing, this happiness that I had always sought, but I couldn't get it there. I was still that little kid on the outside of the house looking in through the window to this family and this experience that was going on around me, but yet I was not a part of it. And so I tried a lot of things. And then this fateful day, when I turned on the TV and I first saw Jon, this opened a door. Now, I need to go back to say that I found mindfulness before that through Thich Nhat Hanh. My first great teacher, not my first, Ram Dass was, but Thich Nhat Hanh was just an inspiration. And through his book, The Miracle of Mindfulness, I learned about meditation. I was involved with 12-step people. I brought meditation into these meetings because I knew how important it was. I had gotten to a point where I was meditating 1 hour a day, every day. And I did that for 10 years before I even turned on Jon's program. And my first 7-day silent retreat was with the Blessed Thich Nhat Hanh in Key West. It was a wonderful experience. And there were some great people there, including our friend Joan Halifax from Upaya. I think it was Joan Halifax, yes. This was before she shaved her head and had taken the robes, but she was already on the Thai's board. And there were some wonderful people there, and Pritam Singh, who developed the Truman Annex and the golf course where all of this took place. There were over 500 people doing this silent retreat with him. And it was just a wonderful experience. But anyway, when I found this thing with Jon, I called to find out, you know, can I come and audit? Because I didn't know any better, you know. And they said, no, but you can come and do an internship with us. And so that's what I did. And over this 10 years of meditating every day, I had changed internally. I had truly transformed, and I had found what it was I had been seeking all those years. But I didn't understand it cognitively, and I didn't have the structure for it. And so it was just a wonderful experience to go to UMass, as I did in January of 1998, and begin this process of training with my beloved teacher, Ferris Buck Urbanowski. Jon was still the executive director there. So it was just a wonderful environment, and there were so many other great teachers there at that time. And so that put me on the path. I have to say that from that experience, it wasn't always easy. They could be a little rough sometimes, really take the Zen approach. But I learned from them, I believe, several important things. And one of them was the importance of practice. The practice, the practice, the practice. Also the importance of training. I have over the years and continue to hear from people that, well, I have enough training, I don't need any more. But I find the more training I have, the more I realize how much I need the training, how important training is, and how that, how over time, what I understand something to mean is more superficial, and that with experience and with depth of training and continuing to go on retreats and to go to Jon's trainings and wherever I can, it's like going deeper and deeper. And then all of a sudden, this awareness of, oh, you don't know what you don't know, and you can't see what you can't see until you see it. And then there's a whole new awareness. And so it's been quite an amazing process. And I'd really appreciate it now, Allan. Perhaps you could ask me something about this. I have so much to say. I don't want to just babble on.
I know, and I'm so happy I got out of my own way with this standard way of introducing, because we may not have heard much of that in the depth that you've expressed it. So thank you, Valerie. That was absolutely beautiful. I'm touched by many points that you made, and particularly that one video that Jon made on the Bill Moyers special. If anybody out there is listening and they haven't watched that, Google it, because there's something about that really touched a lot of us who've seen it since or at that time. So that definitely was inspirational for me too. Well, we've known each other now, I think, for close to a decade in various iterations, first being introduced to you while I was at UC San Diego, CFM, and then we ended up teaching together as we assisted two wonderful teachers, our dear friends Shar Wilkins and Susan Woods, down in Tampa, and that was a beautiful experience. And I think it brought us closer to get to know each other. And since then, we've met along the path and the road in different iterations in different ways, and now here today. So again, I just have great appreciation, because you embody all that wisdom that I think only comes from being in the field at the time when this was growing in the way that you know it. For instance, being in the same room with Ferris Urbanowski was just such a blessing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she did those retreats in Vermont, in the wilderness in Vermont every year. And I was so fortunate to go there because, as you say, she was extraordinary. I don't know of anybody who embodied this more than she.
Yeah. And I'm also touched by how you brought up that kind of whatever it was, I don't want to put words to it, that you said your grandmother gave you. So do you mind just repeating that again? Because you've become so prolific around whatever that was.
Yes, I was such a scared little kid. I was afraid of my mother and I became very angry. I was an angry little kid, an angry teenager, and an angry young adult. But for a period of my life, early life, we lived with my wonderful grandmother and grandfather. They were old country. They were from Austria. She didn't even speak English very well, and she had a third grade education. But she was a hard worker and very successful in life. And she was strict. And she taught me how to work hard and to be disciplined and to do the next thing and to do it fully, actually. I mean, sometimes I sit there and I think back and I laugh because I wasn't laughing at the time, trust me. But when I was a little kid, I could barely reach the handles of a push mower. Do you remember the old lawnmowers that you had to push? They weren't. So we had this huge property. And she was really big in gardening like I am now, but she was really big on this. And it was my job to go out there and cut the grass. I mean, I could barely see over this thing. The heat was killing me.
Yeah.
Tears are streaming down my face, but by God, I was out there and I did it. And so she taught me to do things I didn't want to do, to show up, even if maybe I didn't want to show up, to roll up my sleeves and to do the work, because some things don't just come easily. So I'm very grateful for that. And if you don't mind, I think that may have something to do. I'd like to maybe talk a little bit about community.
Yes. Yeah,
because I think
please.
Perhaps that has given me that awareness or connection with this sense of community. I often tell this story, and I don't know if you all have heard it or not, but I like to repeat it. Thich Nhat Hanh was this great teacher for me. And in 2013, he did a tour beginning in Toronto and then going through the US. And he was talking about his relationship with Dr. Martin Luther King. And they had met. Ty came to the United States looking for help in terms of support against the Vietnam War. And he wrote to Dr. King asking for his help. And so they met and they talked about freedom and they talked about humanity and they talked about peace. And he was able to, I think, draw Dr. King into speaking out against the war, which he hadn't done before. And they didn't spend a whole lot of time together, but their connection, there's even a story on Ty's website, I think still, called When Two Giants Meet. They were truly two giants. And that energy that they ignited in those meetings, I think carries forth with us today. It certainly does with me. And then, in 1967, I think it was, Dr. King nominated Ty for the Nobel Peace Prize. And of course, as so often we politically do, no Peace Prize was awarded that year. Isn't that interesting? So he did not receive it, although he did so much. And anyway, the next year they met in 1968, and they were talking about how important community was. And the Black faith leaders of that time, along with Dr. King, were talking about building a beloved community. And so Thich Nhat Hanh just got involved in that, and he and Dr. King decided they would put all of their efforts into building this community, because without community, what do we have? And then, of course, Dr. King was assassinated shortly after that. And so what Ty did in reaction to that was he made a deep commitment to himself that he would dedicate the rest of his life to building what Dr. King called the beloved community. And so here we are. And are we not perhaps in greater need of a beloved community now than ever? I don't know. I mean, there's so many ups and downs and terrible times. Maybe it's always as needed. But I do know that we need it now. And so it seems to me that it's an important thing to consider in terms of mindfulness. I mean, I remember years ago talking to Jon because I have a lot of heroes. One of them is Thich Nhat Hanh, one of them is Dr. King. There was another one named Howard Zinn, who is Jon's father-in-law, who was this great man. There's a wonderful documentary out, if you can find it, it's worth watching, called You Can't Stop a Moving Train. And here was a guy from the tenements of Brooklyn who went to college and wanted to head up a history department at a university, and he didn't get the job he wanted, but he got an offer from a black university or a black college in the South, which is where he went, which is where he met Dr. Martin Luther King, and then got involved in the civil rights movement. And, you know, the whole rest of his is history. He started off in unions and then civil rights and then against the Vietnam War. He was an incredible force and an incredible power. And I think sometimes it just takes a little bit of inspiration and awareness to become energized enough to look beyond my organization, what's best for me, to what is best for everyone, what is best for the greater good. And there's so many people that do things, you know, I kind of think sometimes, because I make big efforts sometimes, and you know what? They don't always go very well because other people have different ideas and different opinions. But yet I can look at some of these heroes. I can look at Bishop William Barber and the Poor People's Campaign, which is a continuation of what Dr. King started. And how many obstacles these people have had, and yet they still show up every day. They still do the work. They're still tilling the fields. And in the face of such conflict and, you know, 2 steps backwards instead of 2 steps forward. And so it makes me feel kind of silly. You know, sometimes I think, well, I'm silly that, how naive. Beloved community, that's just a silly idea. But maybe it's not. And there are so many people who rise to the occasion. And so, of course, we can do that. And poverty is one of the biggest issues, and we can do something about poverty, for goodness sake. So all of that kind of leads to the children, because another big hero is Dr. Rogers, Fred Rogers.
Yes.
You know, how simple. Some people kind of sometimes joke about him. I think he was fabulous. And, you know, he resonates with children. Mindfulness resonates with children. Kindness resonates with children. And how much all of that is needed today. And that, you know, years ago brought me, well, a couple of things brought me into wanting to bring mindfulness to children. I started off teaching MBSR. As you know, I love to teach MBSR. I love to teach the MBSR practicum. It's so, every time I do it, I get so more impressed with this work. I love to mentor people. And I continue to do that. Right now, I've taken a little hiatus because I've done recently a big event on community and resilience, because mindfulness is what really helps to foster and build resilience. Resilience is a byproduct of mindfulness, and how they are so interrelated. And everybody's talking about resilience, but you know what? They're also really talking about mindfulness, and how every sector, every place, there is opportunity and a need for mindfulness and for resilience. But our children, perhaps more than anybody else, need it. And And to me, that's a sacred trust. And so that's where I think I really believe in the training. We should be certified if we're working with children. We should continue training because working with them is a sacred trust. In all the years that I've done this, I found that the most important thing is to train their teachers and the adults in their lives, because they need to be around people who embody mindfulness, not just talk about it. And teachers are on the front line. I think the last couple of years, other than the frontline healthcare workers and maybe police and fire, all of these people on the front line are in dire need. And so this is such a wonderful opportunity, I think, for all of us, if we have the time and the interest, or could maybe make the time and have the interest to really do what we can. Because you remember in the first chapter of the old MBSR workbook that the drowning, what is it, downstream, upstream,
Upstream,
downstream?
downstream, sure.
Well, everybody's drowning.
Yeah, oh yeah, more than ever. Yeah.
So, you know, what a great opportunity for those of us who believe that there is another way to do things.
Yeah. Yeah, and you have been, as I said, so prolific in taking that energy that your grandmother brought you and that edict of, are you on the cushion today? It's all about practice, and moving it into your community in Miami, particularly working with children and working with the kids. So do you want to say something about the development of that and your time in your community and how, you brought so much?
Well, it was interesting because of my own complicated and unhappy background. I knew how much children really need this. And so that was a given. I got that. And then after I had been teaching MBSR, I don't know, 10, 12 years, I taught constantly. So I was really involved. Many parents asked me to teach their children. Well, nobody was teaching children. I mean, that wasn't even discussed. And so I thought, well, you know what, how different my life would have been if I had had this opportunity, because I know how it was mindfulness that saved me. It was mindfulness that healed me. There's no question in my mind about that. So I thought, wow. And so there was only one person I had heard of in the country that was teaching mindfulness to kids at that time. She was a school teacher. So I called her and she said, well, I'm right. This is so funny. It really is when you think about it. You know, I'm writing a book. You'll have to wait till the book comes out. And that was basically all I got. So I thought, aha. So I decided to create this organization. My husband is a medical doctor, and we founded Mindful Kids Miami. We did a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And I figured, I'm just going to do this. And I brought Daniel Rechtschaffen to Miami because Daniel was then pretty much, and probably still is, one of the leading teachers of mindfulness to children around the world. He's an international teacher. He's a good friend. He's a wonderful teacher. And so I did a long weekend training and invited everybody for free. We organized this to make that happen, and we invited public school teachers, nonprofits, everybody. And Daniel did this 2.5-day training, which was great. And then I kept going. To do a 501c3 was a big deal, and it was expensive at the time, so it took me a while. And before I knew it, Daniel invited me to something he had just put together with Chris McKenna, who turned out to be my group head. Chris McKenna at that time, he's another wonderful teacher who worked with torture victims, and at that time was working with the Mind Body Awareness Project outside of Oakland, which is mainly for children and teens who are incarcerated and really struggling. And they put this year-long training together at Mount Madonna Retreat Center in California, which is about an hour outside of San Francisco. And so for a year, There were 100 people who came from the US, Canada, and Mexico. And for a year, we traveled there, went back and forth, and it was to teach us how to design programs to teach children pre-K through 12. And we had some wonderful teachers, one of them certainly being Linda Lantieri, who is from New York, whose organization was the Inner Resilience Program, one of the leading organizations in this country, longtime New York City principal, and now teaching with Daniel because she's also very much of a mindfulness pioneer. And so we had wonderful people, and Jack Kornfield came, and Jon Kabat-Zinn came, and many wonderful people taught us. So I came back and I had put this program together and began to offer it at a cultural, kind of a horticultural center on Biscayne Bay in Coconut Grove. And we brought in children who were disadvantaged, who went to an after-school program and just started. And I realized, thank God, we started off with some yoga and we did something cool for them. They loved it. These were 2nd through 5th grade, and it was something we created based on superheroes. Because when you're a little kid and you don't have much, the idea of a superhero was very popular with them. And as they bounded off the bus, I could see, thank God we started with the yoga because they'd been sitting all day long. But so I did movement and then some kind of exercise, which was mindfulness, some kind of game for attention. Then we would have them lie down and do some relaxation practice, and then always ended with a kindness practice because children need kindness. It really resonates with them. And it was something that was just very powerful. And as things started going, I could see they couldn't sit still. But over time, I could see they were like sponges and they started to, it's almost like deep down, they knew they needed stillness. They didn't know how to relax. They were over anxious, unable to sit, ADHD. And all of a sudden, over time, they began to really just soften. And so I realized, one day a week after school wasn't enough. So I asked myself, that's all people were doing was after school programs mainly. How can I reach the most children in the deepest way for the long term? Train their teachers. And so that process began, and I started working with some schools independently because at that time the principals could make decisions at their own discretion. Now, of course, that's not the case, but it did lead to my doing a pilot program in Miami-Dade County Public Schools, which is the 4th largest school district in the country. I did it year-long. I was the only teacher, only teacher in Miami at that time. I was the only teacher for a very long time. And I did this 4 days a week throughout the district to make it accessible to teachers. It was just a huge project. We did a research study. Judd Brewer and people up at UMass participated in this. It was an important thing that we did, and it has led to Mindful Kids Miami continuing to teach in the public school system.
Yes, and it's really taken off to a point where, aren't they in the system itself in a very big way?
Well, they continue to work training the teachers. It is still in the system, but there's ways that I think it could be certainly incorporated more. Right. You really do need the buy-in of the administration. And one of the issues in working with a large institution like that is that teachers change. They move from school to school every year, every couple of years. See, when I did it independently in the beginning, before I went to the system, I insisted that the principal, the vice principal, the psychologists, the counselors, and as many teachers as possible do the training. Because if you don't have the leadership, they don't support it because they don't understand it. It's not any ill will. It's just that it doesn't work as well. You need the leadership. And when I went into the school system, they said, no, 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 this has to be open to everybody. And so when that happens, because it's so huge, you only get 1 or 2 teachers from a school. So you're not able to develop a core. You need a core of people. And I heard from principals later that who had done the program in this way, that it completely changed the DNA of the school. It changed everything. And then years later, I heard from some of these principals another important thing, because a lot of these programs don't succeed as well. They don't thrive. And they don't thrive because they don't have the framework or the scaffolding system in place. You need to have people involved in the system itself, really taking on leadership roles so that every school has its leadership team. And then maybe the mindfulness trainers come in and they continue to work with the leaders and with the larger groups. But you need to create a framework. I know that Harvard did this years ago in terms of their medical school and training. You need something like this to keep it going. And the principals did tell me that what happens is that the daily practice begins to fall off. It becomes the missing link. So people wonder, do we train the teachers? Do we train the kids? For me, it's like a 3-legged stool. There's the teacher training first, then the training of the children, and the daily practice. And without all 3, the stool does not stand firmly. So there are things that need to be done that aren't often, able to be done.
Sounds similar to the corporate world, where you really need that buy-in from the top to create cultural change rather than just going in with a program that then kind of disappears. Yeah. Well, fascinating. So, Valerie, it's just an amazing amount of dedication that you have for the field and the work. Where do you see that we're headed?
In what way, Allan? The whole world in general?
Well, I'm talking about the field specifically. Lately I've been hearing that teachers are having some difficulty filling classes. And it's partly because we're on Zoom and everybody's Zoomed out. And it's partly because there are many offerings on Zoom, because before, when people were in their local community, that's where they were. And now everybody is addressing global populations to some degree. Not everybody, but that's happening a lot. And it's just creating, I think, another aspect is that, as you said, it's important to have well-trained teachers. And I think at this point, it's also creating an opportunity for people to kind of hang their shingle in this global manner that may not necessarily have the training. So all that combined, I think, is resulting in what I'm seeing and hearing is more of a difficulty filling classes on Zoom. So I'm just wondering what your view of the field is as we come out of the pandemic, or as we stay in the pandemic, as we move forward.
Yes, I hear everything you're saying and have seen that myself. Well, things changed with the pandemic, obviously, and we did go online. And much to my surprise, I found there were a lot of advantages to being online. However, there are also a lot of advantages to teaching in person. And I feel myself, for me, I'm only speaking from my own experience. For me, it's important to be in the same room with people. There just is a different connection, a different embodiment, a different experience when we are together. And again, whether we're working with adults or children, it's a sacred trust. And so as soon as possible, I am going to go back to teaching in person, because I believe that's the most effective way to do it. Also, for me, the inquiry process that seems to flourish or be more, I don't know, deeper, richer when I'm in the room with people. And I think we lose some of that online. And that's a key part of what we do. I had, I used to do classes for the United Teachers of Dade, our big union here. And then recently with COVID, they, a lot of these organizations and even the school system wanted webinars online. And I feel we lose too much by doing that. I don't want to do that because the inquiry is a great learning resource. So I want to go back to that. We are having difficulty populating the classes, aren't we? And so that's one of the things, too, where I see this wonderful opportunity of going into the community, because there isn't, I think, any place in the community that cannot benefit from mindfulness training. There is no place that will not benefit. And, we just did this big event on resilience. And so the focus of that had to do with ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, which I've brought into a teacher training now that I'm doing. But there's also this other aspect that is compatible with that, which is adverse community environments and how these things interrelate. So the community is everything, and yet the community is what is the fertile ground or not fertile ground for what happens in our families, our neighborhoods, and overall. So here we have an opportunity, I think, especially after COVID, to come in. I mean, what I started doing was reaching out to nonprofit organizations because they are really struggling and they really need the help. Many of the counselors and people who work for nonprofits have ACEs themselves. They're coming from difficult backgrounds. And so there's just a lot of need there. And I think we could take that everywhere with us into the community and try to develop more people for mindfulness by really looking more closely at the need for resilience, the need for where do we go from here? We have COVID, we have the world in an uproar, possibly coming apart. How can we begin to bring everybody back together? How can we build and thrive and foster all the principles of mindfulness and all these things that we believe in? So it takes more work, you got to get out the garden tools and see what you can, how you can prepare the garden.
Yeah, exactly. Get out that hand mower.
That's right.
Well, you brought up upstream, downstream, and, the teaching point of that fable is that we're so busy saving everybody downstream, we stop looking at how they're getting there upstream to begin with. And for our field, sometimes I think we might fall into that trap too. Because mindfulness is now, it seems to me, in every facet of society and communities. It's touching all walks of life and all stages of life and issues with life. And as teachers, we, feel like, okay, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. This has grown in the 42 years from Jon and what he's brought into the field and before that. But yet at the same time, are we in danger of feeling a little bit too proud of where we've come and what we might be able to do in terms of the fact that everybody is suffering to the degree that they are from the pandemic, from all aspects of the world changing and being challenged? So this point you're making, I think, is to kind of re-energize the the gardening that needs to be done authentically.
I don't have that. I don't know whether it's a virtue or a vice, probably more so a vice of pride, in that I've had so many failures and had to struggle so often that I come from a different place, I think. And so I know that mindfulness is not for everybody. It isn't, but it's for an awful lot of people. And like, for instance, in Miami, I do know this. There is an interest in the civic and community areas, in policy areas, and government areas for resilience. This is a big issue with a lot of people, and God knows we need it. What I think may be not so clear to people is that mindfulness is what feeds resilience. It's what creates resilience. The more mindful we are, the more resilient we are. And there is research to demonstrate that. And so I come from a place of, how can I help? Not what's wrong with you, or, but how can I help? What do you need? Would you like me to do a free all-day workshop for your group? I do this with nonprofits or whatever, to introduce people to the experience, not the idea, the experience of, oh, I can feel different, thank God. I mean, I did something recently for a large, important nonprofit. And some of the people knew about mindfulness, others didn't. And they were going, oh God, here she's talking about she's going to be here for 3 hours. I don't have 3 hours. What are we going to do for 3 hours? And I didn't know that then, of course. I was told this later on by the executive director. And she said, after I checked with everybody and they said, oh my God, I want more of that. I had no idea. I didn't really, even those who had been introduced to it before, I really need this. And so I think if we can come, how can I help? What can I do? Looking to see what needs to be done. God knows in our community, there are so many children from all kinds of backgrounds. So for me, adopted kids, but foster kids have the same maternal infant bond trauma that adopted kids have. Only they have more difficulties. The LGBTQ community now is suffering greatly. Their suicide numbers are very high. There are children everywhere, of every color, of every culture, that are in desperate need. And so it's a wonderful opportunity to just see if there's something, is there something I can do? What do you need?
Yeah. The relief of suffering, and it's everywhere, and
not to mention, not to leave out the issue of violence. I mean, we moved to Broward. I'm literally a couple of blocks away from Parkland Senior High School, where they had that terrible, tragic shooting. So saving our children to save themselves and their classmates, because they're suffering so much, they're so troubled, that this is what happens.
The hope's with the children, and they're fortunate to have you, Valerie, in proximity and your community where you are outside of Miami. So I'm wondering, I hope so many people get to hear this, because it's an inspiration for me to hear it, and I'm sure everybody else. I'm wondering if anybody in our Zoom session has any questions, thoughts, comments that Valerie might address while we have an opportunity. Mike?
I think it's a comment about something I heard there. My initial introduction to mindfulness came from, quote unquote, what was called a program called Contemplative Dialogue, which was really about showing up more mindful in a conversation or an exchange with somebody else. And my initial teacher was doing work with the government of Alberta, and that's where I did my internships. or with the government of Alberta. And it started really slowly with a few employees, and it didn't take off until it got to leadership. And it's so hard sometimes to get to leadership. In fact, one of the employees that had started a mid-level manager, they used to hide in a closet to hold sessions and get together with employees. They called them brown bag sessions in the closet. But now there's actually a real budget. 20 years later, 16 years later, there's a real budget. There's actually full-time people hired specifically to continue to grow this movement because it changed the organization so deeply. And it's remarkable, and they did a white paper on it, and there were some research studies on it to try and quantify it. It also changed the families of the employees. So it can work. The question is, having the energy and the courage to go out and fall down multiple times and trying to get this going, or not seeing big change instantly is also really hard. And sitting with a community like this, I find encouragement to continue to try and work with public safety people that are also pushing back on mindfulness, not thinking it's stupid, it's a waste of time, it's not going to help me. Little do they know it can completely change their approach to the world. Yes. So thank you I feel encouraged, and I'm grateful for your time as you share this with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I think you have to be able to get pretty scraped up. I've gotten pretty scraped up, but the intention and the mission is worth it. And every time I get knocked down or hurt in some way, I just get back up even more determined, because the need doesn't change. The need is just going greater. And I think it's just part of it. And then if we look at historically at the great people of our times, how beaten up did they get? So I have nothing to complain about. I just have to dust myself off and go back to it, because it's so important. And if I can add something else, I always like to mention loving kindness, because whether loving kindness is such an important part of all of this work, and especially working with our children. I could tell you so many stories about this. I mean, I could talk for hours about this, but the truth of the matter is, especially with bullies, the bully triad, the bully, the victim, and the witnesses, everybody's scared. Nobody knows what to do. They just revert back to doing what they've been doing or seen on the playground. And telling them in a classroom that that's not a good idea doesn't change anything, because they get triggered, reactive, and they go back to the same behavior. So teaching loving kindness in the classroom or everywhere you can, and then building that inside of them. They love it, because it's a big relief to them. They know what to do. A really trained mindfulness teacher can make a lesson in the classroom about what to do when a bullying situation happens, and teach the kids how to respond and support oh, you must be hurting. Is there something wrong? Can we help you? To both the bully and the victim. This is what's needed to get rid of the fear, because they're all coming from fear. If this child at Parkland had somebody helping him, he might not have done what he did these many years later. So loving kindness is so important. It's the first of the 4 heavenly abodes: loving kindness, compassion, equanimity, and sympathetic joy. And it is the greatest because the others are all built upon that foundation. So,
yeah, thank you, Valerie. Thank you for that teaching. There's a few world leaders that could have used that when they were children, as we unfortunately are living through. Thank you. Mark.
Yeah, I was not expecting that I would be participating here, but drawing a linkage to what I was just hearing you say, Valerie, around bullies, school shootings, and then Allan just made the connection almost for me with world leaders. Going back to what I was hearing you describe of your experiences with Thich Nhat Hanh and earlier path, and that work, that maybe the stage was set when Thich Nhat Hanh and Martin Luther King were collaborating and forming that relationship. And it's emerged up until where we're at now. The work that many of us get to do as teachers, possibly, I'm wondering, is we're working with one at a time, group at a time, organization at a time, teaching mindfulness, the loving kindness components. I wasn't counting how many times I heard you use the word kindness and how important it is to teach this to kids and to enhance it and to embody it. Pulling all the way out into the world stage then is, for instance, what's going on in Europe right now is a bully is an active shoot. It's a metaphor, might be an active shooter scenario. Going right to the Parkland scenario, active shooter scenario. There's an expectation to somehow do something with that to get it to stop. Yet the preventative aspects that I'm hearing you describe, the resiliency that starts to develop, the wounds, the fear that within the teachers, the parents, the kids, the community, the administrators, starting at that grassroots. Love the garden analogy. You said, well, we'll make sure we bring the right tools so that things like what's going on now around the globe might not ever happen, yet it's almost like it's a Parkland scenario on steroids. Just grow it exponentially, and people are looking around saying, I don't know what to do about this. This feels real familiar. Going back to when they were kids and they were bullied or they witnessed bullying on the playground or whatnot. I think I might just be on my soapbox right now rather than, I don't know that I have a question for you, but your linkages here just kind of resonated with me.
Thank you. Well, doesn't that just tell us something about why it's so important to teach mindfulness to children? Because the children are our future, and what they become is what our world will become.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, well said. Thank you, Mark. And Valerie, I just want to thank you. It's such a blessing to the community that you've been over the years, and may it continue to unfold in ways that we can't even imagine right now, because the world needs you as much as all of us in mindfulness.
Thank you. There's a lineage, and the lineage is passed down, and I just happen to be lucky enough to find mindfulness and to be in this thread of mindfulness. I've learned from our teachers, and hopefully what they have taught me, I can continue to pass down and maybe add a few things along the way with the children's aspect.
Well, thank you. Well, as we say goodbye, I just want to thank everybody who is here now and viewing it in the future. If you want to support this work, there's a link down below. Hopefully we're not adding to that Zoom burnout that I mentioned earlier and being part of the problem. But at best, our intention is to be inspirational, and I think, Valerie, you've proven that today. So again, thank you. And wish everybody well.
Thank you.
Take care.
Click down below to join our Mindfulness Teacher Community Facebook group, where you're also invited to post and share. Also, subscribe to Sing to the Mountain Studio so you don't miss out on future recordings of live sessions.